the evil, leather-faced Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, my sister Lindsay reminded me over Christmas that she and I once saw the Dogman when we were a lot younger and we still lived at our parents' house. It wasn't the super nice and ultra giga handsome kind of Dogman that I've been seeing on your channel though. This was a really creepy one, closer to your story of the grinning Dogman. This guy seemed out to cause trouble, like it was all some kind of a game to him, and he was especially malicious. Now that Lindsay and I have been talking about it again, I'm realizing that there might have been an awful lot more going on in that situation than either of us would or could have been thinking of in those days. It makes me wonder if malicious spirits and entities target younger people on purpose, since they have not yet experienced enough to understand what bad news the presence of one of these things is. I mean, if this thing happened to us now, I think both of us would have reacted far differently than we did back then. There were 2 times we saw the Dogman together, although Lindsay had been telling all of us about him for some time before this. I was either 18 or 19, and she would have been 17 or 18, since we were born 13 months apart. She used to make up a lot of crazy stories to get attention when we were kids, like she would talk about when she was a boy and weird stuff like that. As she grew up, she might have started making more sense, but I always still rolled my eyes and assumed that she was off in her imagination land again. If anyone else that I knew back then, any of my family or friends and even some of my enemies, told me that they had seen an insane-looking man-sized grinning upright bipedal Dogman walking around my home, sometimes even cackling like a mutant hyena, I'd have probably been frightened. When Lindsay told me this, though, I laughed harder than that hyena Dogman that she was telling me about. Lindsay was so used to not being believed that she would laugh the hardest when we made fun of her for her stories. Like, one night we were watching a comedy together, and Mom asked Lindsay if she wanted to invite her crazy Dogman friend in, since he clearly liked a good chuckle. Lindsay was rolling on the floor, like this was prime George Carlin material or something. This added to our belief that she had invented the Dogman for attention and would be happy getting it, whether it was mocking or not. Then one afternoon, I wanted to go sit in our old treehouse. Our parents had long-term plans to sell the home once Lindsay and I were both moved out, and I felt I would miss that treehouse most of all. I was right, too. I sometimes have dreams that I'm back up there in that tree. Anyway, I walked over to the treehouse that day and I found Lindsay doing her homework. She didn't mind me hanging out, since I just wanted to sit and stare out at the woods that we had grown up next to. After a while of sitting and staring, I kept thinking I was seeing something moving around out there. It always seemed to move in my peripheral vision, at the sides. When I'd focus my attention on that area, it would have already been somewhere else, once again at the sides of my view. I whispered to Lindsay to come and have a look. It took her a while to notice it, but then she pointed and softly said the word Dogman to me. I had been leaning out of a wooden cutout window, staring out there and squinting. The word Dogman caused me to bang the back of my head on the top of the window as I reacted with a lot of surprise. But while I was holding the back of my head and feeling it throb in pain, I saw what she was saying. It seemed almost as if it had heard Lindsay too. It was looking right at us, but walking parallel to us. Its head or neck was bent so that its deranged-looking eyes and toothy grin faced us directly. It had glowing eyes set into a pitch-black face that had no fur at all growing from it. Around the edges of the features, though, And seemingly everywhere else on the animal man was a whole lot of woolly, thick, brown-orange fur. Its ears, on top, looked black as well. I have never been able to find a photo of any animal that looked like this one, and I hope never to meet one that behaved like this one ever again. Honestly, this beast man looked like he walked out of a nightmare, and I feel the shivers and goosebumps all over again, just typing about it. It looked like a bad guy from a really old silent movie, but this was not a silent creature. It seemed to notice how unsettled it was making me, and that made it rejoice. The creature let out a cackle that sounded almost like an ape in some ways, and a dog in others. Imagine a hyena with a way deeper voice, and you'd be in the neighborhood. I don't actually know how big a hyena is, but this guy probably stood up a little over 6 feet, up on his hind legs. His front legs were sort of like arms, ending in clawed paws, far larger than the ordinary dog paw. I don't remember them looking like hands, and I don't know if the creature could hold things in them, or use them as hands either. I looked at my sister during this, and she was watching the animal man same as I was. She was a lot calmer about it, though. She didn't seem half as frightened as I was, but, like I said, she'd been seeing it for some time before that. I heard the creature cackle louder, and when I found it with my eyes next, I saw that it was running back toward our house. Its laughter seemed genuine, but the context was unsettling. Why was it laughing so hard? Was it actually running to our house? It took me some time to get up the nerve to walk home, and Lindsay thought that was pretty funny. Great, now everyone's laughing at me, I moaned. But we got home safe, and it was dinner time. So I basically filed this all away and went back to my busy life. I forget how long it was later, but either days or maybe weeks, not too long. My sister walked down to my room one evening to return some records she was borrowing. Vinyl, as we call them now, but just records back in the day. I should explain that my parents and my sister had their own rooms upstairs, but when I reached a certain age, my mother wanted me somewhere else, where she wouldn't have to face what I was going through as much. That house had a basement that was split in two, and had 2 different entrances. I took the basement in the rear of the house, where the land dipped lower, and my windows were above ground. Like, the one side of my room was partially underground, but the other side was almost a normal ground floor level to the backyard, if that makes any sense. So Lindsay said, "There's someone outside your window," and I laughed at her, like, sure there is. I had all my shades down, so that if any of the neighbors walked by, they wouldn't be able to spy on teenage me and tell my parents how I was living my life, but when I looked over to where Lindsay was motioning, I did see the shadow of a form over there. Assuming it was one of my friends playing around, I pulled at the shade and allowed it to quickly wind itself up. And when it did, Lindsay and I both saw the grinning, evil, leather-faced Dogman out there. In fact, that was the first time I really noticed just how black and leathery his face was. It shined like hard plastic or a black leather jacket. I think we could only see him from his waist up maybe, but he was right there, just inches away. That seemed to be the funniest thing he ever experienced, because he let out a cackling so loud I could hear it echo out there. The beast ran away on skinny dog hind legs into the woods, and Lindsay climbed over me to pull that window shade down again. This time the leather-faced Dogman had even succeeded in scaring her. We both sat there for a while, talking about what that creature was, or what it might be. Spoiler alert, we had no clue back then, and we have no clue now. It was not just an ordinary beast, though. It ran upright, and it was evil. Animals can be mean sometimes, but they aren't evil, and this thing was. So, while the two of us were having this conversation, Lindsay said she started to smell tires burning. After a while, I started to smell it too. I thought she was messing with my head. I pulled the shades up on my window to see what was happening outside. There was smoke rising up from under the window. There is no direct path out to the backyard from that room. We had to go upstairs to go outside, then down the outside stairs to see that what was burning seemed to be the base of the house itself. I mean, it looked like the outside of the concrete was burning. I got the garden hose, and that put the fire right out with no trouble. But I have no idea what caused it, or what that was all about. Yeah, it happened right where the grinning, leather-faced Dogman had been standing. But it happened a little while after he left. At least, that was when we noticed it. I didn't see him carry a can of gasoline off with him. I hadn't seen anything being held in his paws or mouth at all when he ran away cackling. So what caused that fire? We showed our father where the fire had been. It was already barely noticeable where it had happened, although the smell of burned tires remained until winter. The Dogman never came back, and so there's nothing else that we can tell you about it. I mean, I do think it deliberately tried to scare us, but if it was to feed off our fear, as some people tell me, or if it was really just a jerk, I can't ever be sure. One thing that both Lindsay and I agree about in our adult lives, looking back on all this, is that we hope we never again have to look into the cruelly smiling eyes of the evil, leather-faced Dogman. Dogman versus Dogman. Turf war in the snow. Dear Scary Stories NYC. On the southern shore of Lake Superior, sort of in between Christmastown and the pictured Rocks Lakeshore, there are some ski trails where I once saw two dogmen battling each other. I was with my first wife Marcia at the time. I sent her this email for approval, and she sent back another email reading thusly, and I quote, "My ex-husband likes to lie about a great many things, but the only lies in this Dogman sighting email are the parts where he describes himself as thinking. Also, he's a grown man with no ability to use spell check, which I feel is just sad. But his descriptions of the sighting and the experience that we had that day do match my memories." Unquote. She's a real sweetie, isn't she? Can't remember how we ever fell apart. Anyway, this was the early 90s, and we were staying at this lodge in northern Michigan. Neither of us wanted to ski, but both of us wanted to rent a snowmobile and zoom around, making lots of noise and asserting our dominion over the animal kingdom, as the good Lord intended. These days, if you mention snowmobiles to Marcia, she starts talking about my footprint or something. Like my common footprint? I forget. What is she even talking about? You leave footprints when you walk, not when you snowmobile. Anyway, this is about a time before Marcia was taught by daytime television how unfair her life was, and how footprints are too large. Back in those days, she was sometimes even fun to be around, as weird as that feels to say. So we went whizzing off across the snow together on that rented snowmobile, and we were both having a ball. I felt so free, and that really is an amazing place to be in the winter, just so impossibly beautiful, no matter where you look. At some point, Marcia was tapping me hard on the shoulder and saying something in my ear. I couldn't hear her clearly over the engine, so I stopped, and she motioned past the row of trees and scrub that we were partially behind, and across the snowy clearing, to where two very large animals were really going at it. "It's a bear fight," she suggested softly in my ears. They might have been bears, they were colored sort of like brown bears, but their legs in both the front and the back seemed a little long for bears, a little too thin as well. It was hard to judge relative size from that distance, especially when the entire area was covered in fresh snow. They sure seemed too large to be young bears, though. Marcia shook me and asked quietly for my binoculars, when first one, then the other, large hairy beast, stood up on its hind legs. This caused them to seem to double in size, and I felt like we had wandered into a Godzilla movie. Obviously, that's an exaggeration. Even if these creatures really were as large as we sensed that they were, that would probably top out at 13 or 14 feet when upright, and maybe 6.5 or 7 feet at the shoulder when down on all fours. The snow did come up very high on their legs, but the drifts appeared to be deeper there than where we were sitting in our idle snowmobile. I remember asking Marcia what she was seeing through the binoculars, and I remember not getting any answer. I asked a few more times, as I recall it, but she just kept staring through them. Finally, I asked her directly if I could take a turn looking through the binoculars, and she sighed heavily, then handed them over. When I eventually succeeded in locating the battle in the lenses and focusing, I could not believe what I was actually seeing. "Why did you not tell me this?" I asked her. And Marcia asked me another question in return. "Wouldn't you have grabbed the binoculars away from me immediately if you knew what I was seeing?" Touché. She was right. She's allowed to be correct twice a day, you know, like a broken clock. So the thing we were bickering over was that these were not bears fighting with each other. Their arms were way too long, and when they stood up, their front legs behaved more like arms than front legs. They had these sort of barrel-shaped torsos as well that reminded me more of canines than bears. Their heads really were a lot like bears, though. I mean, it reminded me of Yogi Bear fighting Yogi Bear in the snow. They just needed the green hats, you know? But the ways that they moved were sometimes like a human, leading with their front limbs, and other times like feral canines, attempting to bite each other in vulnerable, fleshy regions. These were Michigan Dogmen. I never believed that they existed, but this was the most logical and simplest solution and conclusion. It's one of only 3 things that Marcia and I agree on, the other 2 being death and taxes. So, it must have been the Dogman. I just don't see any other possibility. In seriousness, though, it felt electrical in the air all around us when we realized what was actually going on. I handed the binoculars back to Marcia so that she could watch this historic moment. I was all tearing up in my eyes, which surprised me. It also stung in the ice-cold breeze. This was a surprisingly emotional moment for me, getting to see these 2 magnificent beasts from legend and lore existing in reality. I mean, the only thing more amazing than getting to see an extinct species alive is getting to see a beast you thought was only a legend alive in front of you. This was so far beyond a bucket list moment. I'm almost out of words trying to describe how unexpectedly moving this was. And the next thing I remember was my then wife uttering my name nervously, with her voice cracking as it pronounced the second syllable. Something was wrong. Looking up, I saw that the 2 huge creatures had stopped fighting with each other. I could see them both from the front, each as clearly as if they were posing for a photo. It was an even more moving moment than any of the prior ones, until I realized that I was being afforded such a clear view of the beasts for a very specific reason. And that reason was that both of them were now angrily charging toward us. We had been seen. I flawlessly started the engine and heroically sped away from the slow, lumbering monster beasts. Well, in my version of the story. But Marcia remembers me having to try multiple times to restart the cold engine, and all the while I supposedly cried and prayed openly to Jesus, Moses, the flying spaghetti monster, and a few other deities. Now me, I remember none of that. I was too focused on rescuing my wife, for whatever stupid reason. We both have differing accounts of how close the creatures got to catching us, and so forth. But the main point is that Marcia's loud mouth only continues to hector the world around her today because I personally rescued her from Dogman versus Dogman. Turf war in the snow. Timothy Walker, 28 months. He's always truthful. He never fronts. Please join us in thanking today's executive producer Godzilla Tim Walker for supporting this channel now for 28 months. That's almost like 2.25 years to us Bigfoots. We give him all our perks, but we could never give him as much as he gives us. Godzilla Tim is one of our most important contributors, and we literally wouldn't still be here today if not for this kind man and his generosity. Thank you, Godzilla Tim, and Happy New Year to you, sir. If you'd like to be loved and respected like the great Godzilla Tim, then check out what our international TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman has to say. Hank? Thanks, Biggie, and thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button. Or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.